We are recording.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to part 2 of our EPUB webinar series. The topic for today is finding and using high-quality EPUB. And if you're joining us from the last webinar last week when we looked at getting started with EPUB and getting to understand the EPUB concept, thanks for joining us this afternoon. So just a couple of housekeeping details before we get started with the content. If you could go back one slide, Christine. Just a reminder that we are providing closed captions for this webinar, and I want to thank Bobby from ACS Captions, who's helping us out with the captioning. We really appreciate your help this afternoon, and we love to provide that service to all of you. So to view the closed captions, make sure you choose the closed caption button in your Zoom menu bar, and then those captions will appear along the bottom of the screen. And then we want to make this as interactive as possible. So we want to hear from you as well. We want you to chat with each other and get to know each other and continue to build the community of accessibility professionals. And so the text chat is a great way to bring some of that interactivity into the webinar. You can open up the chat and then make sure that you choose all panelists and attendees on the drop-down below the text messages. As you see those text messages go by, there's a field right underneath, and then the drop-down menu. So make sure you choose all panelists attendees, and that way everyone will be able to see your comments, or if you have a question, then we'll all be able to see it. And you'll often find that it's not always one of us who answers the questions. You all bring a lot of expertise to the topic, and so feel free to answer another participant's question as well. So we want to leverage your expertise that you bring to this webinar. Next slide, Christine. We have some materials for you that will go along with this webinar that we're presenting, and you can access those materials on the AIM Center website. Leslie's going to drop a link in the chat. It's a short URL that will take you to the same page where you registered for the webinar. That's also where you're going to find the recording from this webinar. So we are recording. We'll make that recording available about a week after this webinar has concluded. It takes us some time to add the closed captions to the recording. As soon as we have that ready, we're going to post it on that same page. You'll also find a digital handout, and that digital handout will have links to a lot of the resources that we're going to mention, including the apps and the different websites. So in one place, you'll have all those links so that you can refer to them later on. And we invite you to share those resources, whether it's the recording from the webinar, the digital handout, or the slides, which you'll also find on that same page, with anyone that you think will be interested in this content and would find it helpful. So again, it's the same page where you register for the webinar. You find all the materials there, as well as the recording in about a week. Next slide. So it is my pleasure to be with you this afternoon. I'm Luis Perez. I'm a technical assistant specialist with the National AIM Center. That's AM for Accessible Educational Materials at CAST. And with me is Christine Jones from Benetech. So Christine, you want to say hello?
Hey everyone, great to be with you all again.
Always great working with you, Christine, and we really value the partnership with Benetech. So I'm looking forward to the content this afternoon. Next slide.
As do we, thank you. All right, let me get to the next slide here. There we go.
All right, so just want to give you a roadmap for what we're going to be discussing this afternoon. So the first thing, we're going to look at the question, what makes an EPUB high quality? Because like many of these formats, not every format or not every title is made the same. And so we want to make sure that you're using the highest quality EPUB to really create the best experience for learners. So we're going to explore that question first to kick things off. And we're going to look at some several sources of high quality EPUB. So once we've determined what makes, for a good experience, then what are some of the places where we can find titles that will support that kind of experience? And then finally, we're going to do a number of demos across a number of different platforms and looking at different grade levels as well. So we've been careful to select materials that address different grade levels, primary, middle school, high school. Because again, we're focusing on K-12 for this webinar. And we're really hoping to get traction for EPUB in K-12 because we really hope it will benefit learners. So reminder, this is part 2 of a 3-part webinar series. So the last webinar was last week on the 13th, and we recorded that. So that's available on the AIM Center website. And then we have one more part coming up where we're going to turn to the creation of EPUB content. So join us on November 10th for that last, that 3rd part of this webinar series. Next slide. So let's just begin with the basics and take a look at, again, that question, what makes an EPUB high quality? And then where can I find high quality EPUB? Next slide. Okay, so there are a number of features that we want to look for, and I'm going to discuss these just briefly, and then also highlight that some of these features have to do with accessibility. So they're definitely going to create a great experience for our learners who have disabilities. But many of these features also have a universal component to them. So they benefit other learners as well, and I'm going to try to highlight that. So one of the first features that we want to look for is page navigation with page numbers. And that's really important when we're talking about reflowable content. So last week we defined EPUB as a format that supports reflowable content. And what that means is that, you know, if we have a group of students and they bring up an EPUB title on their favorite reading app, they may change the text size. And so the page that's visible on one student's screen may be different from the page that appears on another student's page or screen. So we want to make sure that we have a common point of reference, and that's what the page numbers are, because in many apps you can go, you know, you have a go-to option where you can type that page number so that we all end up at the same point in the title. So that page navigation with page numbers is really important for the use of EPUB in the classroom. We also want to make sure that the titles are structured with sections, and then that those sections begin with descriptive section headings. Once we have that structured markup where we have the content chunked in using section headings, we can use the headings to create a table of contents. And that table of contents is really important both for people with disabilities, but for all learners. So the table of contents can be used by screen reader users to navigate to any point within the book really easily. Or they can just press a keyboard shortcut, which I'm going to demo later, to skip around the content using those headings as landmarks so that they can start reading at any point in the book. Table of contents helps all learners because it shows you how the information is structured and how it's organized. So you can get a sense of the book that is in front of you, or the title. You can get a sense of the big ideas and how they're organized. So it's a great universal support for everyone. And then alt text and extended descriptions for images. So if you can't see the images, you need to be able to get an alternative representation of the content. And that's usually text, which can then be read out loud by either text-to-speech or a screen reader if you, you know, need to use a screen reader. And again, we often think of this as just a support for people with disabilities. But if you have a complex image that has a lot of different components to it, has a lot of relationships, well, other learners may benefit from that more explicit description of the information. So again, trying to highlight that, you know, these supports, they benefit people with disabilities in some cases, but they provide a good experience for everyone. And then the last component here is accessibility metadata. So metadata is data about other data. So when you have a book, the book has information in it, but we also have data about that book. And that data could be the author, when it was created, you know, copyright information, but there's also metadata around accessibility and what features the book supports. And we want to make sure that that information is available and that it is transparent so that someone can make an informed decision around the title that's in front of them. Will this title work for me? Will it create the experience that will work the best for me? Does it support the features that I need to use to enjoy my experience with that title? So accessibility, metadata, and just metadata in general is really important for people to make an informed decision. So those are all things to keep in mind when we consider this question of quality, is how does it support, different groups of students, but also how does it support everyone in being able to get the most out of the information. Next slide, please. All right, so I'm going to turn it over to Christine, and she's going to tell us about some sources of high quality EPUB.
All right, great. Thanks, Luis. Excellent background there on, just even what to look for in an EPUB or what kinds of characteristics it must have. So we're going to show you a couple of sources of EPUBs that have those features, that have that functionality built in, that you can feel fairly certain is going to provide an excellent reading experience. And we touched on this a little bit last week in the webinar that we did, the first one in the series, but what we'll find is that sources of high quality EPUBs are still very limited. And that's part of the reason why we're doing this series, because we want to raise the awareness about the importance of EPUB, the value of EPUB for in the K-12 space, particularly as it's already being adopted much more readily in post-secondary. And to the extent that we can get it adopted more quickly and more broadly in K-12, we will start to see a lot more sources of EPUBs become available. So the demand really has to push the supply. And so we're hoping that these webinars succeed in starting to create more demand for high quality EPUBs. We mentioned this a little bit last week, but it's very likely that you've been reading EPUBs and maybe not even knowing it. Let me see if I get my slide. There we go. So it is an industry standard now, especially on the commercial side, as well as in post-secondary textbooks, as I mentioned earlier. So two very common ebook stores that use EPUB as their default format are Apple's bookstore and Google Play's books. So when you excuse me, that sneeze was coming on for a little bit there and I was trying to hold it off, but it was unsuccessful. When you download a book from Apple's bookstore or from Google Play Books, it isn't likely going to be an EPUB. It's just that you don't really know that, nor do you really need to know that, but that's part of the reason why it's such a great reading experience, is because it has all these features built in. And there are a couple of EPUB providers we're going to mention today. These are predominantly those still carrying mostly post-secondary materials, but VitalSource is a very large distributor of post-secondary textbooks. They have a storefront that provides EPUB versions of textbooks, and Red Shelf is another similar source. And Benetech has actually partnered with VitalSource, and we've created sort of a separate storefront that I'll show you a little bit later that contains some materials, although again, the bulk of them at this point are really going to be K-12. These are predominantly paid sources of EPUBs, meaning you'll have to pay for these. Most of the books in Apple's bookstore and Google Play Books, with the exception of any content they make available for free, such as non-copyrighted titles and classics and things like that, you'll have to pay for. And definitely the same is true with VitalSource and Red Shelf. So they're making these materials available, but at a cost. But definitely it's a great alternative. In fact, the more that students are able to purchase their, let's say, post-secondary textbooks from these sources, they're going to have an excellent reading experience rather than necessarily being limited to a print version of the book. They're going to have an electronic version of the book that has all the features that Luis mentioned earlier and more, and a lot of, that it can be a pretty much of a guaranteed reading experience. I will say that VitalSource and Red Shelf both have their own proprietary readers. So you actually can't, I don't believe you can read their materials on other in other platforms. So you have to read it in their reader as part of their system, sort of like Apple. But they are nonetheless good sources for electronic textbooks for students, and especially students who really value those features that Louise talked about, and we'll go through those a little more. Meanwhile, as we mentioned last week, Bookshare, which is an ebook library for people who read differently and people with reading barriers such as dyslexia, visual impairments, and physical disabilities, can read in ways that work better for them. That repository actually contains about 10,000 books that we call freely available. Excuse me. They're available to anyone, including non-members. So you don't even have to be logged into Bookshare to access them. They are generally either made available by publishers who want to broadly distribute their materials and are willing for them to be available out there, excuse me, maybe for education purposes, under fair use or similar types of agreements, or they're actually, beyond the copyright expiration. So maybe classics, or works of from Shakespeare and things like that. But what our team has done is gone through and vetted these 10,000 books and pulled together some collections that you'll find helpful. One is called Free Books for All. And there's a link to that here, and then Free Children's Books for All. And I've also linked to a Help Center article here from the Bookshare website that tells you how to download and read these books. Of course, we'll demonstrate some of that today, but you'll want to be able to reference that later. And these books generally are going to provide a good reading experience. If you're wanting to demonstrate EPUBs to parents, let's say, I would definitely use the Free Children's Books for All list. The Free Books for All list obviously is a very broad list of books, and it does have some that are, more geared toward the upper grades as well as adults. So if you're going to show parents the benefit of EPUB, then the children's books list is definitely the way to go. But they're both great lists, and we recommend them you can go through and find books that you like. They've all been vetted, and we have gone through and done our best to make sure that they are going to offer the right kind of reading experience. And we're going to be demonstrating some of those shortly. I did want to briefly talk about an initiative that Benetech started called Global Certified Accessible. So many of you who are familiar with Bookshare know that it's been around for about 20 years. And so over the course of that time, Benetech has learned a lot about what it is about Bookshare books that make them work for people with different kinds of reading challenges. So a number of years ago, probably 5 or 6 years ago now, we started guiding publishers in how to make their materials what we call born accessible. So in other words, since they're already producing digital content, predominantly content that, it's in a digital format, then there are a few steps they can take to build these accessibility features in from the beginning, so they come right off their production pipeline already having these features. And so we'd been working on that for a few years and discovered that, publishers were both open to it and also wanted to develop kind of a collaborative relationship with us. And so we launched a program called Global Certified Accessible, in which we evaluate the materials from publishers, and we work with them on a very collaborative basis to help them end up with a production pipeline that is fully going to produce these accessible materials. And then they get a certification from us that they can then promote. And, there'll be a day, hopefully soon, when we'll be able to point to many other sources of global certified accessible ebooks that we can say they meet these criteria. You don't even have to go through any kind of a checklist with the publisher and say, does it do this? Does it do this? Can I do this with it? Because if you get them from one of these sources, you're going to know they already meet all those criteria. So basically the know before you buy concept, or the know before you borrow. And quickly, I did want to just show some information on the Benetech website where you can find the list of current companies that have passed this certification process. And I'll talk a little bit more about the certification process as well. So let me just go to a new share here. So this is actually the bookstore that I mentioned, the Vital Source Benetech bookstore. That's for accessible ebooks. So you can certainly search for titles here, but as I mentioned, these will predominantly be post-secondary books. The Global Certified Accessible section of the Benetech website here, which is benetech.org. And then if you go to, actually, let me go back. I'll just go back to the beginning and show you how to get there. So benetech.org, under work, and then education. Down here is our Born Accessible section. And then you can learn all about the Born Accessible initiative. And then here's Global Certified Accessible. And basically it explains the process. And then let's get down here to where we can see the certification. So certified publishers. And we do ask you, if whenever possible, to take advantage of these get materials from these publishers, and there are links here. So Macmillan Learning, Guilford Press, Kogan Page, and Anansi. I'm not quite sure how to say that. Those publishers have completed the certification process, so we definitely hope that you'll reward them by purchasing materials from them. And then there are vendors who also go through the certification process who are not necessarily the publishers, but have another role in either the production or the distribution of materials. So that's Nugent, Amnet, and Apex. So you can check out their websites as well for their materials. They've all taken the time and effort and the expense to certify their content and their processes so that they're really going to meet all these criteria. And then, as I mentioned, there is the Vital Source bookstore. Let's see. Yeah, so I was back under the Born Accessible section. Here's accessible books for content purchasers. And then I selected the Learn How link. And that takes me to, it says stores. So here's the Vital Source store by itself, and then Benetech's Born Accessible store, which is basically a partnership with Vital Source. And it's just our collaborative effort with them. So again, you're welcome to search for materials here and see if there are any that work. And again, the more demand that consumers are placing on them, the better. I do want to mention that, and I can actually show it here as well, as far as the process. Let's see. So there are a couple of steps to the process. We put the files that we get from the publishers, we put them through a couple of different checkers initially, and that gets us about 25% of the way there in terms of checking the accessibility. Then it's a very manual process after that. There's a lot of, we pull the the outcome of those first couple of checks into another tool that is actually called SMART. It's by a group called the DAISY Consortium, but we've customized a section of it that's not available publicly that we then use to go through and literally check table by table, image by image. We view the results from the report that was initially generated, and then use that as sort of a guide to go through and check on things that need to be corrected. And then we provide a very detailed report to the publisher including some excerpts of the code that we found that actually needs to be corrected and where it is in their product and what needs to be done to it and everything. So we give them a very detailed report of things that need to be remediated or corrected, and then they make those corrections and send it back through the process. And as one of our team members, Charles LaPierre, says, wash, rinse, repeat. So just keep going through the process until they reach a score of at least 80% of all of the accessibility features built in. And we're working toward, I can go back to the slides now, but we're working toward, or we hold them to a standard that's actually pretty high, even by today's standards. We are expecting conformance not only to the EPUB Accessibility 1.0 specification, but also to WCAG AA, which includes proper page navigation and logical reading order, correctly coded images that are properly described when a description is required, and Luis talked a little bit about that, proper use of landmarks and semantic markup, and that the tables, links, and lists are correctly marked up and described when necessary, and that it has the correct and transparent accessibility metadata, as Luis talked about. So we check for all of those things. And then once the materials reach a standard that we have set, then they get this accessibility certificate, which is good for a year for that production line of materials. And then again, we just kind of keep going through the process with them. But by this, what we're doing is we're coaching and guiding them. It's not our intention to, necessarily shame publishers or, make them look bad for their practices not being compatible with accessibility, but rather we're coaching, we're guiding, they're learning, they're iterating on their end, and they're becoming very, very socially, and they're becoming very conscious of these issues and the need to provide the materials in a way that work for all learners. And as Luis said, these features really benefit a wide variety of learners, not just people with visual impairments, but the ability to have content read aloud, the ability to see the words highlighted on the screen. All of these are going to benefit a number of different types of learners. With that, I think Luis is going to jump in here.
Well, before you switch from this slide, so again, just want to make the point that this is one of those metadata that can be associated with the title, whether they've passed, a third-party certification like the Global Certified Accessible. But this is just a seal of, quality, essentially. So as you're looking for EPUB titles that have been certified in this way, then you can be sure that they have all of those features that are going to create that accessible and really nice reading experience for everyone. The other thing I want to highlight is one of the tools that's mentioned on the slide, Ace by Daisy. We're actually going to look at that in the next webinar, because there is a version of that tool that you can use, you can download for free, and you can actually use it to check the accessibility of any EPUBs you create. And so on the next webinar, we're going to look at that, not just the publisher side of it, but also how you yourself can start creating EPUB and making sure that those titles that you create or those documents that you create follow some accessibility best practices. So let me pause here and see. I want to make sure if there are any questions about the Global Certified Accessible before we continue. And also, if you are using any of these sources, so if you've used VitalSource or RedShelf, or are you using EPUB in Google, Playbooks or Apple's bookstore? So just want to hear from you. Go ahead and use the chat. Just let us know what's been your experience with those tools. And also, if you have any questions about anything we've covered so far. I'm going to practice some wait time here, be a nice teacher. So I see Troy says he uses the bookstore with his students that are on IEPs. That's great. And as Christine mentioned, there are lots of free titles in there too. So a lot of the classics are available on any of these bookstores, because copyright is then not an issue. It's just a matter of formatting it into the right format so that it can be submitted to the bookstore. So if you're looking for Shakespeare for use in a high school English class, or fairy tales, those kinds of things that are out of copyright, then you might be able to do a search for it on one of those bookstores and find a free version. Anyone else? So this one's for you. This is a good question from John. Are NYMA source materials in Bookshare and accessible EPUB? So Christine, I'll turn that one over to you.
Yes, absolutely. So NYMAC sourced materials, the NYMAC, for anybody who's not aware, is the National Instructional Materials Access Center. And it's a repository of K through 12 textbooks that was created by IDEA 2004. And as long as it's specified in the purchase agreement, when a district or a state purchases textbooks from a publisher, the publisher is supposed to put a version of that textbook in the NYMAC so that it can be available to kids on IEPs who need it in a more accessible format. And so Bookshare is a conduit for getting NYMAC sourced books. If they might be already in the Bookshare collection, and if they're not, educators can request them and ask that they be added to the NYMAC. Added from the NYMAC to Bookshare if they are in the NYMAC, and then they can be distributed to Bookshare members. There is the additional requirement, which is a NYMAC requirement, that students have to have IEPs. That's not a requirement to access Bookshare generally. Bookshare just requires that you have a print-related condition or reading barrier, a disability that limits your ability to read or process printed text, but doesn't necessarily state that you need to have an IEP. But for those NYMAC-specific materials, an IEP is required. So all books in Bookshare are available in a variety of formats. The caveat, and including EPUB, I will say, however, that the NYMAC textbooks sometimes are going to be unavailable in EPUB, and that's largely because our conversion process, the pipeline, if you will, is running into the barriers of what it can handle with some of these very large file sizes. If you're talking about let's say a large biology textbook with lots of images in it, it's an enormous file. And the way that Bookshare offers materials is it starts out in the DAISY format, Digital Accessible Information System, is the standard format in which all materials are initially placed in Bookshare, and then we convert it to an EPUB upon request. And so that conversion process sometimes is hindered by just the sheer size of the file. So we figured it out at one point, it was something like about 1% of the books in Bookshare are going to have that issue. And in that case, you likely won't see the Read Now button. The members won't see the Read Now button to access it in Bookshare web reader, but you can download it. Sometimes you can still download it in EPUB, though most often the issue is the same, and you can't download it in EPUB, but you can download it in another format. It's a little bit of a roundabout way, but you could download it as a Word document and then either just use it in Word because it's a really nice reading experience that way as well. There are a number of tools that read that format very accessibly, or you could always convert a Word document to an EPUB. So then you kind of end up with the EPUB there. And next week, I think we're going to talk about Word to EPUB conversion.
That's right. So that's a nice segue into that, Christine.
Yeah.
I like how you did that. So there are a couple of questions that just came up, but in the interest of time, we're going to come back to those. So just hold those in mind for just a second. We're going to continue on. So if you could go to the next slide, Christine. So we want to share with you a few places where, there's specific features that we're going to talk about in our demos, but we want to make sure that you have some places where you can look at the research and what the research says on each of these features and which students benefit from them most, and and in which ways. So one of the centers that's also based at CAST, just like the AIM Center, is a center called the Center for Inclusive Software for Learning, or CISL. And they've done research on features of reading systems. And so I think it'll be the next screen. Let me see if I can move the chat out of the way. Yep. So you can go on here, and if you want to look at the research, for instance, on line spacing, or text-to-speech and read aloud, or different fonts, this is a place where you can access that research and see what the research says, what the evidence base is for any of the features that we're going to demonstrate this afternoon. Even better, if you can go to the next slide, Christine. CISL has developed something called the Inclusive Reader, and you can find that at inclusive.cast.org. And what that is, it's a reading environment. It's not just based on accessibility, but also universal design for learning, since CISL is based at CAST. So definitely influenced by universal design for learning. There are a number of titles available in the Inclusive Reader, and this is a great place to take students to try out some of the features that they may then find in a number of readers. So here you can, there's a little cog on the right side of the screen, and when you open up that cog, you'll see different options for line spacing, for text size, for different colors. So it's a great way to experiment with some of the features that are supported by EPUB. So you can try them out with students and see how well they work with them. And then it's also a matter of students finding their preferences, right? So over time, they find what works best for them. And then that's one way in which we prepare them for the future. So they leave K-12 and they can go into higher ed and the workforce with a really good sense of what features they need to be successful. So we're going to go to the next. Oh,
Just I wanted to ask a quick question. So are all of the books inclusive? Are they all EPUBs?
That I am not sure about. I would have to ask, but they are open source. So they're
okay.
all. Yeah.
Thank you.
I believe they are, but let me check on that and get back to you. So we're going to demonstrate a number of those features now, and we're going to use a combination of videos and live demo. We'll pause after each one and see if we have time to answer a few questions. So the first one here, we're going to be looking at a middle school title. It's The Adventures of Odysseus and the Tale of Troy. And the demonstration is going to show you Dolphin Easy Reader. This is a free mobile app that runs on iOS devices like the iPad, and then also on Android. There is a Windows version available for it, but that's a commercial application. So it's free on mobile devices. And what I'm going to show you is how to customize things like the font, the text size, the colors, and more. So Leslie, if you could go ahead and queue up that video, then we will get that demo going. And I see Lynn is in the chat. Lynn is representing the CISL project. So Lynn just answered, yes, all of the books inclusive are EPUB. And I should have known that, but I got a little fluster there. This is a demonstration of the many visual adjustments that are possible in the free Dolphin Easy Reader app for iOS devices such as your iPad and your iPhone. Here I've opened up The Adventures of Odysseus and the Tale of Troy in the Easy Reader app. I'm in chapter 1, and at the top of the screen in the upper right hand corner, I'm going to tap on the big letter A. And this will allow me to see the different text settings that are available in Easy Reader. The first thing that I can do is adjust the text size by using the slider at the top of this pane. And you can see the text getting bigger in the background or smaller. And this could be helpful to someone who has low vision, or if you just need to make the text bigger as a preference. I can also choose different fonts. So here the book's default font is selected, but there are some other options here. And some students with dyslexia will find that a font like Open Sans will be easier to read, or there's a specific font that has been designed for people with dyslexia called Open Dyslexic. And you can choose that option as well. So there you can see that it has some different weight to some of the letters. in the strokes. So that can be helpful. The research on these kinds of fonts is still ongoing, but some learners may prefer that, and so that's something you can try out with them. I'll go ahead and just choose Open Sans for the rest of this demo. You can also adjust the margins here, so that will bring in the text so that more of it is in the center of the screen. This is a feature that I use since I have lost some of my peripheral vision, and so I like to have more of the text in the middle. I can also adjust the line spacing so that there's more space in between the lines, or the letter spacing. And both of these settings can be helpful for somebody with dyslexia. It can avoid some of the crowding that can happen between the lines of text or between the letters. So that may be something else that you can try out with a student who has dyslexia. And then finally, there are some themes available. So you can choose different color combinations. And again, some of these will be a matter of preference. They can help students have an easier time perceiving the information. So for instance, I can go to a dark blue theme, and now you see that I have light text on a dark background and the background's blue, and that's also going to affect the read aloud. So I can customize this by changing the text color, the background color, and then for the read aloud, there's some sentence and word highlighting that's possible. So for instance, in here, I can come in and maybe I want to make the highlighting for the sentences yellow, and then the word highlighting, I want it to be, let's choose a color here, let's say white. And at any time I can reset everything to the default. So if I've made a number of changes and maybe I want to go back to the beginning and try out different options, I can reset this at the bottom of the screen here. So this affects the text, it affects the layout, and then as I said, if I turn on the read out loud, then the colors for the highlighting is also going to be affected.
Chapter I. This is the story of Odysseus, the most renowned.
And you can see that I need to choose a different color there for the word highlighting. So many times you'll try different options, and then until you arrive at the one that works out the best here. So let's go ahead and choose a gray and see how that works out.
Renowned of all the heroes the Greek poets have told us of Odysseus, his wars and...
That works a little bit better. So lots of options in here to try out. But again, the idea is to have a flexible display for the information so that you can meet the needs of a variety of different learners. Some of whom may have low vision, some of whom may have reading challenges such as dyslexia, and then some of whom may just have different preferences. So that's been an overview of some of the custom adjustments that can be made to the display in the Dolphin Easy Reader app for iOS, which runs on the iPad and the iPhone. There is a version of this app that's very similar on Android. Thank you so much, Leslie, for sharing the screen. Let me just pause there, see if there are any questions that you have, or if you've used this app or any of these options that I showed that you found helpful with your students. So go ahead and use the chat. And Christine just answered, yes, I got to that at the end of the video. So there is an option for using Dolphin Easy Reader on Android as well. And it looks very similar to the iOS version. So it looks like that's the only question that we have, but feel free to share your experience with Easy Reader and also any of these features that you've used. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Christine, and she's going to lead us through the next demo.
All right, great. Thank you, Luis. And yes, we love Dolphin Easy Reader. I just want to put in a plug for that tool for Bookshare as well. And it does integrate directly with Bookshare. Bookshare members can log into their Bookshare account within the app and download books that have been shared with them or to which they have been given access. And then they can read them and customize their reading experience. So it's a really wonderful tool. So now I'm going to show a fifth grade book. It's a fifth grade level book, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, which is also a freely available title. And I'm going to show it in the Bookshare web reader, which is a free web-based reader that's available for use. And if you're reading a freely available book, it's available to anyone to read copyrighted content from within Bookshare. Of course, you would have to be a member with a qualifying reading barrier. But for anyone, anyone can access the Bookshare web reader and read the freely available titles. And it does work very nicely on a Chromebook. The features I'm going to show are particular to Chrome, Safari, and the new Edge, the latest Edge browser. All three of those browsers support the functionality that I'm going to show you. And I'm going to also show an add-on tool that's available in all three of those browsers as well, called Read and Write, that complements the Bookshare web reader. And you'll see that as we read, there'll be word-by-word highlighting that helps students stay engaged. There's actually a lot of research to indicate that that kind of engagement, those engaging features such as the word highlighting and text to speech and the ways that you can interact with the text, those tend to improve students' comprehension and the amount of content that they read, and their reading fluency is strengthened with these kinds of features. So definitely recommend it. Let me go ahead and bring up the Bookshare website. Just wanted to highlight really quick, this is the Help Center article that's on the freely available books, and you can get it from Help Center and then search for the word freely. Then you'll find this page. It lists these three vetted collections of freely available titles, and then it also gives instructions for downloading and reading them. So that's a great page to know about. And then I'm going to show you, I'm just going to pull up this 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. I had already searched for it previously, and you can see that I'm not logged in to Bookshare. And so not being logged in, you'll see that several versions of this title come up that are not available to me, and those are copyrighted content. However, here's one with the Read Now link. So this is going to be true of any freely available titles that are readable in the Bookshare web reader. They'll come up with this Read Now link. As a side note, you could also download this as a Word document, or you can download it as an EPUB if you want to do that and import it into a different reading tool. You can do that. You can download it as Daisy text. So any of these freely available titles can either be read in Bookshare web reader with the Read Now, or they can be downloaded for your purposes as well. And so then when you select the Read Now button, I'm just going to jump over there to show you. It just brings up the book in Bookshare web reader, which is here. And I've opened it up to chapter 7. There's a table of contents. Again, it's important to be able to have the navigability in the book. And so I've opened it up to chapter 7. I'm going to start out by using the built-in text-to-speech reader within Bookshare web reader. And again, this feature is available when you're using Bookshare web reader in either Chrome, Safari, or the latest Edge browser. All three of those browsers support this text-to-speech and word highlighting. If someone is already using a screen reader, they would use, they could use pretty much any browser that supports that screen reader and then use the screen reader to read rather than the built-in text-to-speech. But I'll go ahead and select the play button.
50. Chapter 7.
Oops, I can't remember if I selected the, can you guys hear the audio, Luis?
Yes, we can hear the audio, Christine.
Okay, great. All right, let me do that again.
50. Chapter 7. An unknown species of whale. This unexpected fall so stunned me that I have no clear recollection of my sensations at the time.
Okay, and just to point out a couple of things in the settings menu, there are some options for selecting a font size from 12 to 70 point. There are 4 different color schemes: black text on white, white text on black, dark brown on a light brown background, or this B-line, which is color gradiated text. I'll show you more about that when I get out of the settings menu here. You can also make, as Luis was talking about, when some students need larger margins, you can adjust those here too. You can speed up or slow down the rate of speech. And as far as voices, you have the option of choosing from the voices that are installed on your machine, depending on if it's a Chromebook or this is a Windows laptop. So I have 2 different Microsoft voices available to me. And then, so this color gradiated text here is the same color at the end of one line as at the beginning of the next line. And there's some thinking that helps with tracking. So that's why that's that way. I do quickly want to show an add-on tool called Read and Write, which is this little purple puzzle piece here. It's a Chrome extension. It's also an extension available in the latest Edge and in Safari. And I like showing this because it lays over on top of Bookshare Web Reader and is available for all these freely available titles as well. And Read and Write is a free tool for teachers, and everyone else can enjoy a free trial. And once the free trial is over, the feature I'm going to show you is still available, which is the reading, text-to-speech and word highlighting. I select the hover speech tool and literally just hover my cursor over where I want to start reading. Which of course is not wanting to work. Let's try that again. All right, let me just select some text and see if I can start reading that way.
This unexpected fall so stunned me that I have no clear recollection of my sensations at the time. I was
Okay, so I like to show that because I like the color contrast better in that. And then also Read and Write has its own voice options. So when you go into the options menu here, you can play around with different voices, and there are different offerings than what's in regular Bookshare Web Reader. So love to show that. And I'll stop there. Let me go back to our slides. Okay.
There are a couple of questions that came up before we finish the last demo and the limited amount of time. But someone mentioned one issue they have with students is with students finding their place mid-chapter. So a lot of these tools support bookmarking. So you can tap an icon on the page and it saves your place. And then you can use the navigation features within the app to find your place. Then often when you close a book, when you come back into it, it should pick up exactly where you were before. So that.
Yep. Yeah, so Bookshare, sorry, Luis, Bookshare Web Reader specifically isn't great about remembering the place, at least especially, or even starting to read midway through. But that's another reason why I love that Read and Write tool, because as you could see, when I have the Read and Write tool enabled, I can start reading anywhere. And as far as remembering where you left off, it should remember if it's the same student reading the same book on the same device, it should come back open to the page where they left. But the difficulty is if they start reading on one device, let's say a Chromebook, and they're reading a Bookshare Web Reader on a Chromebook, and then they want to pick it up on their iPad using Dolphin Easy Reader, those two tools don't sync with each other. And so there's no way that Dolphin is going to know where the student left off.
Yep, thanks for that clarification, Christine. And then the last question here, let me bring that back up and then I'll do the last demo. Any free tool similar to Read and Write? So just remember, we mentioned this on the last webinar, that the text-to-speech in Read and Write, even after you run out of the trial period, you can still use the text-to-speech for free. Then also Read and Write is available for free for teachers. So if you go on the Text Help website, you should be able to find information there that will show you how to get it for free as a teacher so that you can try out some of the features, including the premium feature. So that's you get the premium account for free as a teacher, but the trial, when it runs out, even if you're working with a student, they can continue to use the text-to-speech. All right, so in the interest of time, we're going to move on to the last demo here, and then we'll wrap up. So for this last demo, I just want to do a quick demonstration of screen readers and how they work with EPUB. And for this demonstration, we're going to look at a Biology 1 textbook from CK12. Again, this is available in that Bookshare freely available books collection. And we're going to look at the Thorium reader on a Windows computer. So this is a free reader For Windows, it's actually cross-platform, but the Windows version is the one that's available on the Microsoft Store. It's the one that I found the easiest to install and use. And we're going to look at it and how it works with the NVDA screen reader. NVDA stands for non-visual. Well, actually, I'm going to explain it in the video, so you will just hear it in the video. But what we're going to highlight here is that if you're a screen reader user, you already use a number of keyboard shortcuts to navigate web pages. And if you'll remember back to last week's webinar, we mentioned that under the hood, EPUB is using web technologies. And so a lot of those familiar keyboard shortcuts, they will work within EPUB as well with these reader apps. So Leslie, you could go ahead and queue up the final video here and we'll take a look.
This video is a demonstration of how to navigate an EPUB title using familiar keyboard shortcuts with a screen reader. First, let's take a look at a few common screen reader shortcuts that can be used to navigate on a web page. Here, I'm going to be using the NVDA screen reader. NVDA stands for Non-Visual Desktop Access, and this is a free screen reader for Windows. With NVDA, I can navigate through the headings on a web page by pressing the letter H on my keyboard.
Main landmark AEM for remote learning heading level 1. AEM basics heading level 2. Navigating AEM heading level 2. Featured items in navigating AEM heading level 3.
Similarly, I can navigate in the opposite direction by holding down the Shift key and pressing H on my keyboard.
Navigating AEM heading level 2. AEM basics heading level 2.
Another keyboard shortcut I can use is the letter G, which will let me go to the next graphic and hear the alternative text that's associated with that image.
Photo of a laptop computer on a desk graphic visited link. Photo of a girl using a mobile device graphic link.
Now that we've looked at a couple of keyboard shortcuts that can be used to navigate a web page with NVDA, let's take a look at how these same keyboard shortcuts can be used to navigate an EPUB title in the free Thorium Reader for Windows. Here I've opened up a biology textbook that I've downloaded from the freely available books on Bookshare. This is a book created by CK12. Just like with my web page, I can press the letter H on my keyboard to navigate to the next heading within this title.
A scientific view of the world heading level 1. Nature can be understood heading level 1. Scientific ideas can change heading level 1.
And just like with the web page, I can hold down the Shift key and press the letter H to go back by heading.
Nature can be understood heading level 1. A scientific view of the world heading level 1. Goals of science heading level 1.
And once I find the desired section where I want to start reading based on the heading, I can press another keyboard shortcut to start reading from that point on in the book.
Heading level 1 Goals of science. Science involves objective, logical, and repeatable attempts to understand the principles and forces working in the natural universe. Science is from the Latin word, scientia, which means knowledge.
And I can press a keyboard shortcut, in this case Control, to stop the speech. I can also press the letter G to go to the next graphic and hear the alternative text that's associated with that graphic or image.
Girl in a grocery store graphic. Pictures of the solar system and a Ferris wheel graphic.
This has been a quick demonstration showing you how, with a few keyboard shortcuts, it's possible to navigate an EPUB title, which is essentially a compressed set of web pages, in the same way that a student would be able to navigate web pages with their screen reader. And in this case, I've used the NVDA screen reader on Windows to navigate through an EPUB title with a Thorium reader.
All right, thank you so much, Leslie, for sharing that. Okay, so we are just about out of time, but if you have any questions, we have very limited time, only 1 minute left. Just, If you could share the slides, Christine.
Oh, sure.
We have our contact information. It's available on the slides, which you can download from the same page where you registered for the webinar. Our contact information is included in the slides and also in the handouts. And so we invite you to reach out to either one of us, Christine or myself, and we'll be happy to help you with any questions that we didn't get to today. We'll also try to leave some time for the last webinar in the series to address any of these questions as well. So as we wrap up the series, we'll have some time to address a range of these questions that we didn't get to. So with that, we are right at 3 o'clock. So I want to thank you all very much for joining us this afternoon. We hope you found this webinar helpful. We encourage you to share this information with others out there. So as Christine said, we can increase the demand for EPUB and drive that market model for this kind of reading experience. So thank you to Bobby from ACS Captions for providing the captioning today. We hope you were able to find that helpful and useful. Thank you to Leslie for coming through and helping us with the sharing of the videos and also sharing the information in the chat. And as always, thank you all for your contributions in the chat and for sharing your knowledge and your experiences. And we'd love to see you at the next webinar. So thank you so much, everybody. Take care. We'll see you soon.
Thanks, everyone.
And thank you, Christine, for being such a great co-presenter.
Of course. Thank you, Luis, for the opportunity.